Hello, and welcome to another edition of Virginia Wine and Song, the YouTube channel where we explore Virginia wine and we talk about an album from the classic era of rock and roll or pop music, which I have defined as 1964 to 1999. So that is my definition. Everybody has their own, but that's mine. So today we're going to be talking about a Virginia wine. It is now October. We have entered the fall season, which is a great season to go around Virginia and visit the wineries. And every section of Virginia has got wineries. You'll find at least one winery in every geographical area of the state. Some you'll find a lot more than one winery, and others you may just find one winery, but you'll find a winery somewhere. And this is a great time to explore the coastline, explore our various rivers that go through the state and the lakes, and even the swamps. If you're down in the Dismal Swamp area, that's worth checking out. There are actually wineries around there too. So I'm now decided to become a spokesperson for the Virginia Department of Tourism. But I'm just telling you, fall is a great time to go to the wineries in Virginia. So no matter where you go, you'll find a winery. So today I'm going to be spotlighting a winery outside of my normal area, which I've been concentrating quite a bit on the Shenandoah Valley. So I'm going to go out into a different area of Virginia. We're going to go out to the Monticello area, a little south of the Monticello wine, the Monticello AVA. The AVA, of course, being agricultural viticulture area. I think that's what it stands for. I think that's what AVA stands for. But there are only a couple of AVAs in Virginia. A like an apple, V as in Victor, A as an apple. So what does that mean? That's a good question. AVA meaning, okay, meaning in the Bible. I don't need to look it up in the Bible. AVA meaning in wine. American viticultural area. So we have several, and this one happens to be in the Monticello, or if it's not in the Monticello AVA, it's very close or south of the Monticello AVA. And this winery, I believe, is really one of the best wineries in the state. It's not as well known as some of the others like Barboursville. Barboursville is north of Charlottesville. This one is south of Charlottesville. It's a good 30 minutes or 40 minutes south of Charlottesville, actually. It's on the way to Lynchburg, right off of Route 29. And it's an old town called Lovingston. And that's the name of the winery, Lovingston. Lovingston Winery is a winery that I discovered kind of by chance back in 2007 or so, 2006, 2007, somewhere around there. They've expanded their tasting room since then, but when I visited there, it was pretty raw. They had just a basically kind of industrial area, and the tastings were conducted in a countertop looking over the tanks and the crush pad area. So it was very industrial. Looking at their website now, it looks like they've added a couple of things to their winery to make it a little bit more like a regular winery. But I have no problem with industrial wineries. In fact, the more industrial, the better, as far as I'm concerned. I like to be enjoying a glass of Virginia wine by the tanks and by the crush pad. I like that. So anyway, this is Lovingston Winery, and they do a couple of wines. They don't have a huge selection, but the ones that they do beautifully. And I was very happy to see that they were still open. I thought during the pandemic they may have closed, but it looks like they are still open, and you can still get their wine online, and you can also buy it in a couple of stores throughout the state. And of course, go to the winery to get the best selection. Currently, they have a Sauvignon Blanc, a Petit Manseng, and a Chardonnay. Those are the three whites that they have. I think their whites are pretty good. I remember them being pretty good, but usually I go for the reds when I go to this winery because the reds are really what make this winery just outstanding in my opinion. So we're coming into colder weather, and cold weather is a good time to have red wine in my opinion. So for the reds, they do have a rosé. Most wineries do have a rosé, which I don't think I've tried. So the rosé is probably pretty good. They have a Cab, for the reds they have a Cab Franc, they have a Pinotage, they have a Merlot. So those are the big, bold reds they've got. Cab Franc, Pinotage, Merlot. They have something called a Cape Blend, which is Love Virginia Cape Blend. It seems like they have another label called Love Virginia. That I have to find out more about that label. It looks like it's a different label, but they're selling those wines at Lovingston Vineyard. Rotunda Red, which is what this is. This is Rotunda Red. This is what I consider to be kind of their signature wine. They've had this wine on their menu, ever since I started visiting. This is a 2021, and it's Josie's Knoll. Josie's Knoll was the name of the vineyard that they grow the grapes on. And this is Rotunda Red. Rotunda, of course, named after the Thomas Jefferson Rotunda in Monticello. And this is probably, as far as reds are concerned, this is their most economical, the most affordable red. And I shouldn't say affordable, but they're the more budget-friendly red. And it's $28.95. It's basically $29. It's still kind of high, but for a really great Virginia red, it's worth it. And this will age. You can age this for a couple of years. The Rotunda Red is, I believe it's a blend of Merlot, Cab Franc, Pinotage, Petit Verdot, and Chambourcin. So it's got quite a few different grapes in there. Merlot, Cab Franc, Pinotage, Petit Verdot, and Chambourcin. Chambourcin is kind of a lighter style red that works really well in all seasons, I think. That's why I think this wine is so tasty, because it has all of those different varietals in it, and it makes for a very good. You could drink this just by itself, or you could have it with a steak, or you could have it with a pasta dish, heavy tomato pasta dish. You could even have it with maybe just something with shrimp. I mean, the nice thing about these types of red blends is they go well with pretty much anything, but I usually just like drinking this on its own. I decant it usually beforehand. This is a great wine. And as far as reds are concerned in Virginia, this type of wine will probably go for over $40 in Northern Virginia. But you go further south, and by this example, I'm talking about pretty far south. If you live in Northern Virginia, you won't be able to go down there and come back in one day. You're going to want to overnight somewhere in either the town of Livingston. I think there are a couple of Airbnbs or B&Bs around there. There is a motel. I think it's just called the Livingston Motel. It's right off of 29. That's where I stayed actually in 2007 or 8 when I went down there. It's a real bare bones motel. I'm not sure if it's still there or not, but it's right off of 29. I like staying at the old-fashioned motels where you can drive your car right up to the entrance of the motel and go into the motel from the outside. I like that. I'm kind of weird that way. So I don't know if that's still there, but if you can't find any places in Livingston, I'm sure there are places in Charlottesville. Charlottesville is only about 40 minutes away. Lynchburg, I think, is about 50 minutes away. So it's a good winery, definitely to check out on a weekend trip. There are other wineries in the area as well that you can check out, but Livingston, make sure Livingston is the focus. You will not go wrong getting any of their wines there. So Livingston wine. Now I'm going to move on to the music. The music doesn't really have anything to do with the wine. I try to find a connection between the album or the band and the wine, and it's really hard to do so. I did a couple of times, kind of really, abstract connections. But today, I'm going to talk about a band that I talked about in my last video. And when I rewatched my last video recently, I thought I was really tongue-tied, and I was, talking really fast. I must have shot that video in the afternoon. I'm better in the morning. So I'm shooting this video in the morning. I think I speak better in the morning. So I want to do another video on the same band that I spotlighted in the previous video that I did around Labor Day. And that band is Genesis. In the last video I had talked about Foxtrot, the Genesis album from the Peter Gabriel era that had just been re-released on SACD. And it's a great album, and it's a great SACD. I've read reviews on that SACD over the last couple of weeks, and everybody agrees that it's really a great pressing of that, either the vinyl or the SACD. So the Genesis album I'm going to talk about today is from the Phil Collins dominated era, which is the era that most people associate with Genesis. I don't want to quote American Psycho or anything like that, because if you've seen that movie, you know all about the difference between Peter Gabriel era and the Phil Collins era. The Phil Collins era was the era where they had the most albums during that era, and they had the most hits during that era, and they seem to be okay with having hits. I think even the more artistically inclined members of Genesis, which are Tony Banks and Mike Rutherford and Steve Hackett before he left, they were okay with having a couple of pop songs on their albums, but they definitely liked the more arty songs. And all of the Genesis albums from the Phil Collins era, all of them from 1976, which is the first album that they did without Peter Gabriel, all the way to the final album with Phil Collins was in 1991. All of those albums have, a couple of arty, kind of long, epic type songs on them, but they also have a couple of songs that are more pop oriented. So Phil Collins brought the pop stuff to the forefront a little bit, especially when Phil Collins became such a successful solo artist. He had a couple of huge hits. So anyway, I'm going to talk about the last album that Phil Collins did with Genesis. And this was released in 1991. And this album is called We Can't Dance. And this is a vinyl pressing that was released in 2007. It's a 4-album. There are actually 2 albums in here because the songs are so long they couldn't squeeze all the songs onto one album. So it's a 2-album set. And what's interesting about a lot of bands that were around during this period are like U2 and Genesis and Sting. They made a lot of albums that were really meant for the CD format, because by 1991 CDs were the #1 format for buying music. Albums were kind of passé. The fascination with the vinyl hadn't resurfaced yet, and cassette tapes were kind of going away as well. So CDs were the primary format, and this album, I don't even know if it was originally released on vinyl back in 1991. I think it only came out on CD and cassette. So this pressing in 2007, I believe, was the first vinyl pressing of this album. And like I said, it's 2 albums. The songs are very long. And I think this is a really great, I don't know if Phil Collins thought it was going to be his last album with Genesis, but it certainly feels that way. Genesis actually put out another album in 1997 without Phil Collins. They had another lead singer for that album. That album was Calling All Satellites, and I've never heard that album. I'm sure it's okay because it's got Banks and Rutherford on it. But anyway, this is the last album with Collins on it, singing and playing drums and also writing most of the lyrics. And a lot of people kind of don't give Phil Collins enough credit for being a great lyricist. He writes some very good songs. I mean, from a composer standpoint, a lot of them are kind of love songs, of course, but he also has a lot of songs that are kind of about social issues. The highlight of this album is a very long piece. I think it's over 7 or 8 minutes, and it's called "Driving the Last Spike." It's the epic song, or one of 2 epic songs on this album, and it's basically about the British working in the tunnels and creating and building the railroad in the UK. And no matter how they were treated, how poorly they were paid, they were out there working their asses off to build the railroad that spans the UK. And that song is "Driving the Last Spike." I think I said "Driving the Last Spike." I hope I didn't say "Building the Last Spike." I can't remember what I said. It's "Driving the Last Spike." "Driving the Last Spike" is all about that, and it goes on for a long time. And it's got, I think there are at least 3 different musical movements in that song. That song is a pure Genesis masterpiece as far as I'm concerned. It's on par with anything they did in the Peter Gabriel era, or anything they did in the late 70s when after Peter Gabriel left. So that is the highlight. The other highlight of this album, that is another epic song, is a song called "Fading Lights." And "Fading Lights" is the last song on this album. This pressing, by the way, was pressed in Germany. So I haven't opened it because it's sealed. It's sealed because I don't have a decent turntable, and I don't want to open it and play it until I have a decent turntable. So currently it's sealed, so I can't pull the albums out. But I'm sure they're good, because I've bought vinyl that's been pressed in Germany before, and it's really quite sturdy, very heavy-duty vinyl. But anyway, the last song on the album is called "Fading Lights," and it's basically exactly what it sounds like. It's about taking your last bow. And when Genesis toured, they toured, I think, in 2000. I think they toured in 2021 or 2022. And Phil Collins, it was the last time Phil Collins was touring with them. He's probably not going to tour with them again because, like I said in the last video, he's got some physical challenges right now. He has a hard time getting around, so he probably will not tour. Maybe he will, but I don't think so. The last song they did on that tour was "Fading Lights," and that's the last song on this album. And it's another long one. It's about 7 minutes long, and it's got a couple of different movies. And that's unusual for a Genesis album from after 1980, because, like I said, from 1980 to 1990 or 1989, the albums were, when a group made an album, they were thinking about vinyl. They were thinking about getting an album to fit on a two-sided disc, 2 sides of one album. So the Genesis songs, they usually, for that era, between 1980 to 1989, they usually had like only one song that was sort of kind of a long, epic type of song that went over 8 minutes. On this album, there are 2, because like I said, they recorded this with a CD format in mind. So anyway, I think this album is probably one of their best albums they made in the 80s and the 90s. They put a couple albums out in the 80s. Invisible Touch was the album that came before this, and I don't really need to talk much about that album because everybody's heard most of the songs from that record. It wasn't a bad record. It's basically, it's got a lot of songs you've heard a million times on it. I prefer this album because it's got more variety, I think, as far as both epic songs and also songs that are kind of more poppy oriented, and also kind of social commentaries. There's a song on here called "Jesus He Knows Me," which is all about phony preachers and tent evangelists and people who sell snake oil to the masses, and they all claim that Jesus, He loves me. So I think that's a pretty timely song. If you take a look at the political landscape we're living in now. That was actually one of the singles from the album. They had a couple other singles from this record. I Can't Dance was probably the big hit from this. I think that was a top 10 hit. But there were a couple others on this album that were on the radio, like Jesus He Knows Me and Hole in My Heart. Hold on my heart. Not hole on my heart. Hold on my heart. Hold on my heart was a Phil Collins ballad. Phil Collins, almost it could have even been one of his solo hits. It was okay, kind of a syrupy type thing, but not bad. But I love this album because of the epic songs on here. This is a CD copy. It's also the remaster from 2007. A lot of purists do not like the 2007 remaster of this. I just found this out this week when I was reading some music blogs, because this album was remastered in 2007 as something called high-speed mastering, which is almost like a remix. And what that does is it kind of brings out the production. It really kind of brings everything out to the foreground. So a lot of purists don't like that because it takes away some of the subtleties that Genesis had on their other albums. I like Genesis. I'm not a die-hard super fan. I haven't analyzed every one of their albums to death. I just like the music. So to me, I've heard this CD. I have not heard the album yet because, like I said, I had it sealed. But the CD sounds totally fine. It's half speed, digital remaster, whatever. It sounds good to me. There's a song on here called "Since I Lost You," which was not released as a single. I think it should have been released as a single because it's a beautiful song. It almost makes you tear up when you hear it because it was written. Phil Collins was good friends with Eric Clapton, and Eric Clapton had just lost his son around the time that Genesis recorded this album. So Phil Collins wrote "Since I Lost You" as a tribute to his son, Eric Clapton's son, who passed away. And of course, Eric Clapton had his big song "Tears in Heaven," which was also written for his son. So very sad song, but I think another one of the highlights from this CD. So anyway, "We Can't Dance" by Genesis. I hope I wasn't as tongue-tied as I was when I was talking about Foxtrot. I can't think of a connection with Livingston wine. The word Livingston, maybe love, and "Since I Lost You," which is kind of a love song to Eric Clapton's departed son. We'll make that connection there. So anyway, thank you for watching. Please enjoy a good Virginia winery this fall, and we'll talk to you soon.